What's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome to episode 11 of Domiciled, the podcast that explores the subculture of truck drivers as well as logistics professionals, bringing their stories to the masses. I'm your host, Scott Cleary. Well, now Paul is away on a work trip, and at the time of recording, which is October 29th, he's at a Golden State Warriors game out in San Francisco. I hope you get your very own foam finger, bud. Anyway, these last three episodes, we haven't been together, and I'm starting to forget what you look like. So will you come back to me soon already? With that being said, I will be skipping our banter again because, you're not around, Paul, but I have more than enough to talk about with our next guest, and you'll soon find out why. Our next guest has spent over 20 years in logistics as, and I hope you're ready for this mouthful, a CDLA driver, expert witness, fleet owner, broker, and executive, DOT fleet advisor, subject matter expert, transport manager, CPC exposure and risk management specialist, defensible program developer, highway safety advocate, and pro cat herder. I'm pretty sure the only thing this guy doesn't do is sleep. He's here on the screen with me right now, and we'll do our best to cover as many bases as possible, but mostly here to have a good time and tell some good stories on this episode of Domiciled. Welcome to the pod, Rob Carpenter. Look at that. Jack it up right at the end. But anyways, Rob Carpenter, how we doing, buddy?
We're good. How are you?
Hey, like I said when you hopped on, all smiles all the time, and like you replied, it's all you can do, right?
That's it.
Oh man, so I rattled off a ton of different things right there, and I imagine in our give or take an hour conversation today, we're not going to get into all of it. But the first thing I mentioned, if anybody can remember at this point, was the fact that you did and still do hold the CDLA license. Let's start there and then naturally work through kind of where you're at today. And like I said in the intro, tell some good stories in between. So what got you into this other than tripping and falling into it like most of us?
It was kind of a funny deal. When I grew up, I didn't have the best parents, so I ended up being kind of pitched to some grandparents that had a farm.
Okay.
And so you on the farm, you've got heavy equipment, you've got combines, trucks, and I mean diesel just kind of is everywhere. So you kind of get that acclimation to heavy equipment and work and just being exposed to that kind of industrial element, even if it's not 100% trucks or, maybe it's yellow iron or whatever it is that you're working with,
Hmm.
it's still got the diesel element to it. So once you kind of get it in your blood, it's like it's kind of stuck there. There's times where um, I'll be in an office and it's like I just wish I could go drive a truck. And then there's times when you get back in a truck and it's like, damn, I wish I could
What
be
was
back.
I thinking?
Yeah. So, it's kind of a mixed bag. To me, it's a love-hate relationship, but you never really kind of get it out of your system. And I went from basically being on the farm to going into restaurants as a teenager because that's what teenagers do. And then I realized
Or
there's
should
no
do,
money
right?
in it. Yeah, definitely not. But I would say, restaurants kind of helped me a lot with transportation because a lot of people, I don't think, grasp the level of multitasking skill that you need to work in logistics. It doesn't matter if you're a truck driver or a freight broker or you're running a business. I mean, you have to be able to multitask, and you're never going to learn that. You're not going to learn that anywhere better than either as a server or somebody that's working a cook line.
Yeah.
I mean, whether you're frying or broiling or plating, whatever. I mean, it helps you really like at the throes of, you know, throw you in the fire type deal, but you learn it. Um, got out of that, went into truck driving, and I think the piece for me with truck driving was one, I like trucks, but two, I wanted that practical element of the experience. I mean, some
Hmm.
people don't really look at it, like, hey, he's just a truck driver. But I think a lot of people look at that perspective and they say, hey, we need that perspective in our business because as leaders, a lot of times they don't have that perspective. So, yeah, started as a truck driver and went into brokering freight to learn the business side of it because you're not going to learn so much of kind of the financials, the business piece, supply chain, etc., from the driver's side. So, jumped into brokering, became an agent for another guy that I know that owned a brokerage. Jumped out of that, managed some companies, and ended up buying one of those when the owner retired. Continued to run that, sold it, went into PE management as an executive at enterprise carriers, and then I got in a trucking accident, and that trucking accident is kind of what took me into compliance because I was anything but compliant before that. So that's kind of how I
Okay.
got where I am. Short version.
Yeah, exactly. Short version. So, you say that's the short version. Let's begin elaborating on that a bit. Now, you started off with talking about being in the restaurant business, and earlier in the conversation, you said you went to your grandparents because you and correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that you were emancipated from your parents at 15, correct?
So I left my parents when I was 4. Actually, my parents
4.
left me when I was 4, and
Oh wow,
I moved in with grandparents, and then I got emancipated from grandparents when I was 15,
I
and
see.
in a little town called Yorktown, Virginia. So I went to court one day after I just went to walk to the courthouse after school, filed the paperwork. Like, there's really no point being here. I already have my house. I have property. I have a car. I can drive. I work. So there's
Wow.
really no point, right? In having parent, or grandparents at that point. So that's kind of how I kicked it off as an adult at 15 after the emancipation. I mean, I think everybody has their age of turmoil and or wildness. Went through that, and
Uh,
ultimately it ended up where we are now. Trucks kind of became the thing, and it never really got out of my system. Now what I still drive now, but it's more from everything I touch pretty much is brand new. So it's usually from the factory, whether it's for Kenworth or Volvo or Mack or whoever. Um, so there's a little bit different perspective there than hauling freight and getting dirty every day. I mean, you're driving brand new equipment, but
yeah.
um, even that gets old after a while. So
100%. And I find it interesting that you said that you walked to the courthouse, right? And of course, I want to keep this what you're comfortable discussing, but it begs the question. Obviously, it wasn't a snap decision; it's something you've wanted to do. But did that come from as a surprise to your grandparents? Were you just trying to be like you just like, hey, I've done enough where, like you said, I have property, I have job experience. I just want to be on my own, or was again that not a great experience for you either? And you're just like,
no,
I gotta just get out of this.
I think the whole thing, like actually not. I don't think very many people have even asked on the personal side. I think a lot of people understand that I've had a pretty tragic life, but I don't think anybody's ever really specifically asked about it. But when my father was a drug addict, my mother was a drug addict. I even have issues from being the child of people who used drugs while they were pregnant. So it was,
Wow.
um, you know, I think there's a lot of things that people have to overcome. And when my mother left, I was 4. My father shot himself. There was nowhere else to go. We were going to go into foster care. My brother was 6 months. I was 3 going on 4. My sister was 5 going on 6. And my dad's mother stepped in and said, "Hey, we'll come out of retirement and take on these 3 kids under 6 years old."
Yeah.
And so they did. And her father owned the farm, and he lived next door. And so it wasn't like they had any shortage of childcare help. We had family
Yeah.
that lived all the way around us on the farm, and basically, I went there. I went to work. They started. That was the first time I'd ever been to the doctor. It was the first time I'd ever been to a dentist. I mean, I didn't know how to read, and I was almost 4 years old. I mean, I didn't know anything.
Right.
I hadn't really been exposed to any kind of social elements or anything like that. So it was totally green.
Hmm.
So it was like taking on feral children, and they did. They took it on. They got us educated. They got us, medical attention. We were taken care of. But they also taught us how to work, and they taught us the value of hard work. And I worked, until I was 15 years old. And one day I was like, I just don't see the need really to have to follow anyone else's rules because I
Hmm.
already support myself. And
Okay.
if I'm already handling like the responsibility of an adult, I'm just going to
Hmm.
go file this. So I went to the library. I got the form, the petition. I filled it out, typed it up right there on this, York County public computer, walked next door to the York County courthouse. And I walked into the juvenile court and filed it. And they're like, you know, so from there,
Hmm.
it kind of proceeded and went to the judge. And at that point, Kathleen Keller, she's still alive. She's on my Facebook now, but she worked for the juvenile court service unit at the time, and she basically said, hey, we've done the home studies, we've checked this out, like he's good. We think he's good for it. So as far as we know at that point, I mean, you're talking maybe 97, 98. I was the only one successful in terms of getting an emancipation that I filed on my own in Virginia. So
Wow. Okay, so that's even kind of a record for Virginia itself.
yeah.
And so okay, so that's interesting. So of course, like you said, parents weren't exactly role models, and I'm sorry to hear that was the case. Of course, out of the fire, a lot of times you do get success, which it seems that you definitely had your own version of, and that's wonderful to see. And I'm sure the woman that you're connected with on Facebook loves seeing what you've accomplished given what you came from. So that's fantastic, and thank you for sharing that. If it's something that you haven't really shared before in an interview, that means a lot to me. And again, that's I'll say on the other side of things, I definitely come from a family that respects and appreciates hard work, but I could never say that I had it tough, right? Like my family didn't necessarily have a lot of money growing up, but like any good parents would. I have a fantastic family. I'm very lucky on that part. They hid any issues that we had, right? And for anybody who doesn't know, I grew up on Martha's Vineyard. Now, I will say I grew up there. I didn't have a summer house there. So I'm not, your spoiled rich kid, but I was lucky enough to grow up in a beautiful place. And again, had great parents, have two awesome siblings who are carving their own place in the world. Um, but I just think about me at 15, and I was working like part time at one of the yacht clubs, like lining the clay tennis courts, and you were getting emancipated because you felt like you're your own man now, and that's pretty fantastic. Maybe fantastic. That's pretty incredible. Maybe fantastic is not the word, but just incredible. Um, that's where you were mentally, especially given, for lack of a better term, the stunted growth up till the age of about 4. So that you got to that place, pretty incredible in its own right.
Yeah, and I kind of look at, even when I was in the private equity backed enterprise executive roles, people would call me, terminal managers from around the country would call and say, "Hey, we've got this guy that doesn't exactly pass on the criminal history. We need your approval." And I could
Interesting.
still objectively look at it, but there's still a part of me that recognizes, like, and I think a lot of people miss that piece that, hey, people have issues in their backgrounds that they're going to have to overcome. And maybe I was more sensitive to that than others. Now,
Sure.
obviously, I'm not hiring like anything absolutely insane.
The
Uh,
violent felon. You're like, probably not.
yeah. Like, I mean, if we're talking like violent felonies and sex offenses and stuff like that, it would always be kind of like, yeah, maybe this isn't a good idea from an exposure perspective.
Hmm.
But I think there was still something that kinda taught me as I grew older, like, there's a lot that people learn and they grow exceptionally quick, and at an exceptional level when they're exposed to situations where they're kinda thrown into the fire.
Hmm.
And, I'm not gonna say everybody's successful like that because it doesn't happen all the time, and, but there's, Emerge Careers is a company I'm on the board of, and the reason I take part and I help them and I do not charge them is I know that their organization is one that kind of helps those people that come from bad backgrounds. And a lot of who they help are people who are trying to get their CDL, trying to get through entry level driver training, but they're coming from a position of prison. So it's like, how
Okay,
can
so
we get
they've
them?
been imprisoned.
Yeah, or they're in prison
Okay.
right now and they've
Okay.
applied for the program. So they basically apply with Emerge. Emerge will come to me and basically say, "Hey, check this guy out. Do you think we can get him placed if we train him and we get him his CDL?" So that's a big thing. That's a lot of what I do. So I think that that's another piece that people miss with CDLs. It's like the CDL for a lot of people is just a door that they just did not have. It opens doors to opportunities that a lot of these people would have never had otherwise,
Hmm.
whether it's from background or decisions that they've made or whatever. So um, I think a lot of people in our industry come from traumatic backgrounds, and maybe that's why they like the isolated nature of the truck or the freedom of the truck.
Sure.
But yeah, tough tough times create tough men. What is it? Tough men
Yeah,
create
yeah.
tough times. So I think
Mhm.
I don't know what stage of that we're at right now, but I think it depends on who you are.
True, right? And I guess it's kind of subjective to the person. And yeah, you and I talked about that a little bit. And I think it's along the lines of, like you said, tough times make tough men make easy times make soft men, or maybe not soft,
Yep.
but either way, then soft men make hard times, right? It's that cycle. And like you said, subjective as to where we are now. Um, yeah, I'd like to think we're somewhere in between and not necessarily in the soft. We're getting towards a hard time, right? But
Yeah.
shoot, it feels like we're in a hard one globally
Seems like
sometimes.
we've been in a hard one, but you know,
Right, right. And again, I can't really bat an eye at saying at hard times. I've personally been very blessed and have gone through my own grind and my own mental turmoils, because I'm just a head case myself, but that I've done my own work on. But one thing I was interested in touching on a little bit more too, you just mentioned, like, hey, look at this guy. You think we can make this work? What is it that you look for, and do you get to interview them as well, or is it really just on paper? But like, what do you look for that says, okay, this person has had this past, and I love the idea of a second chance, right? Because I don't think anybody should be defined on something that's happened to them. Because if you're not in their shoes, you really don't know what caused them to perform that action or do that thing that, in this case, caused them to be incarcerated. So, what is it that you look for? And again, do you get to talk to them or interview them?
so I've created. I want first. I'd never met any of these people. So
Okay.
I worked directly with the founders of Emerge and the
Mhm.
people that work with them. And I basically built them a matrix to kind of automate this, to say, like, these are generally things that motor carriers will frown upon to make them harder to place.
Mhm.
This is how long it was. This is a habitual behavior versus a non-habitual behavior. This is a violent behavior versus a non-violent, or a property crime. Like, so if they want to go to work for FedEx, obviously we don't want people with property crimes delivering packages to home.
Right.
So basically, I've built a matrix that kind of takes all of these things into consideration: time, length, crime, how often is it habitual, etc. And that kind of automates a lot of the, can we place them? The second piece is, if there's somebody that's really suspect and like, hey, we can't figure this out from Rob's matrix, they'll send it to me and say, hey, can you review this? And a lot of
Gotcha.
times what happens is I'll look at it, and if I have questions, I'll pitch it back and say, I think we can place this guy in industry XYZ. But
Gotcha.
to do that, I need more narrative on this conviction from 2023, because it's too recent and it's very comparable to the one that they had in 2018. And then they had an
Is it
accident in
repeatable?
2023. So was it an at fault accident? Do we have a crash report? So there's all
Mhm.
kinds of things. And kind of, I'm looking at this thing, one, from an exposure perspective, like, do we want to place this person? Is it safe?
Mhm.
Is it going to
Mhm.
lead to any kind of exposure on our end or the carrier's end? But can we reasonably find them employment? And success is part of the program. So if we can't successfully place them, do we want to spend the money to educate them and get them the CDL? And that's a tough position. It's like, you want to help everybody out, but you can't help everybody out.
Right. No, that's interesting. And hey, without somebody like you doing that, they might not get a look at all, right? They don't
Right.
necessarily know. And this company, Merge Careers, right? That they're also out there advocating for these people and using you as the tool to help them
Yeah.
understand these folks better, to place them in the right place if they can. Um, that's very interesting. So again, think you're not going to learn something in a day? Here it is, right there, right?
Right.
But you mentioned, you were driving for a while. How many years were you behind the wheel?
Dude, I got my license in 2005, and
Mhm.
then I end I drove even when I owned the company. So I didn't drive as much, but I still
Right.
drove. And even now, I might drive 2 or 3 days a week. Like, I don't definitely
Really?
don't do it
Still?
full time. Yeah. So,
Okay.
and I mean, there's people that we basically kicked off a program called, it's like Undercover Boss, basically, but it's undercover driver. So
Okay.
we have C-suite clients that are like, hey, I don't want to go drive in a truck, but I want to have frontline visibility into how our program and our hiring programs and pay and dispatch programs can improve, or are we doing everything great? And what we'll do is we'll get hired by the company. Nobody knows who I am. I look like a driver. I go in and I talk like the driver. Do my drug test just like everybody else. And then I go drive a truck. I work with a dispatcher. They tell me, hey, your truck's going to be in Iowa. Go pick it up. This is the number. This is who you'll meet. I go there. They don't know who I am, and I drive, and I'm dispatched on loads. And basically, my job is to assess what was the drug test process like, what was the onboarding process like, what's dispatch like, was your dispatcher good? Are we likely to retain drivers based on how we run things? And that gives them a perspective from the front line that they typically wouldn't have, but they get it from somebody that they trust. So they don't necessarily have to go get in that truck and drive like Werner's CEO just did, and kind of satisfies the same objective.
Interesting, and you've got the perspective, right, where it's typically the C-suite, even if they know the ins and outs of trucking, probably haven't driven. And again, maybe have, right? That's not right, but more often than not. Interesting. So that, I mean, shoot, I got a lot of questions about that one. I could go a while, but so keeping with the spirit of why Paul and Danielle and I, unfortunately, she couldn't make it tonight either, but why we started the show, the spirit of why we started the show was to get some of those driver stories while also learning a whole lot more. What are some of the more memorable things from running that company, that service, of maybe just some stories that really stand out, if there are any that you care to share?
Well, running it, there was always a story. That's kind of where the cat herder title comes in. I mean, it was like it's nonstop crazy, but no matter which one of those roles you're in. But as a driver, I was trying to think through this. When people will ask me this question, is like, what are your best stories from the road? And it's like, you don't have stories as a driver, you have experiences, and it's like they could go on for days or years in discussion. But I was looking back through some photos, back when I started driving, cell phones were not a big thing. I think people think we're way farther along than we just really kicked this cell phone thing off. It seems like it's been around forever.
But
But
it really hasn't.
like 98, we were using StarTacs and Motorola was like the king of cell phones. And before that, it was the brick. And so I think the first one I was using when I was driving trucks was like I don't know, a Motorola X2 or something. So I have images from that. And I went back and I looked and I'm like, oh man, that's that ice storm. So that was a memorable one because there are states that require chains in the wintertime, and there are states that know how to handle ice, sleet, snow, etc. Because they experience it all the time. So they're kind of equipped for that. But Georgia is not equipped for ice and snow at all. In any capacity. So I knew it was going to snow. I left anyway from Virginia going to LA, but I had to stop in Atlanta first. So I get down there and like, if I'm fast enough, I can bump this out, get out of here before it really hits hard.
And not hitting I-10, you had to go north.
Yeah. So get stuck on, I think it was 285 down there for 3 days. Like to completely shut the interstate down. So this was January. Man, you made me forget now. January 10th, 2011 through January the 13th. We were stuck on 285. I mean, there were trucks sideways across the interstate because the ice just twisted them around. I mean,
jackknifed. Yeah.
It was a bad 3 days. And then when we wanted to get started, temps started to heat up. They reopened the interstate, but we couldn't go because everyone was stuck on ice. We couldn't get any traction. So it was literally one truck at a time. A truck would back up, shoot some salt, we were gone. One
you
truck
help each other out.
That's it.
Wow.
And it took that was 3 days. Fortunately, where I got stopped for the 3 days was like a mile and a half before the pilot at like exit 231. So I could walk to the pilot, get what I needed, and get back to the truck. But a lot of times when people talk to me about winter driver training, it's like, make sure you have crap in your truck for winter because you just don't know when you're going to need it.
I was just going to say that, like, for anybody who might be listening to this, you're like my aunt and two of my cousins and like 3 friends. But, you have to think about, like, okay, you're stuck in truck. You weren't stuck in a hotel. You weren't stuck at home. Like, you're in a sleeper cab. And do you have enough food? And in your case, like you said, you're a mile and a half, which I'm sure was a rough mile and a half those 3 days, but still you could go get some essentials, right? But if you didn't have, like, what if you weren't, right?
Stuck.
Be hungry a few days.
And you got to think the pilots don't have unlimited supplies of food. So if the interstate is shut down, it's more difficult for the pilot to resupply. So
You're the one moving the stuff they need, right? You
right,
and your you and your computer,
yeah.
your
So
peers. Oh my god.
that was a mess. There was an avalanche in Colorado. I've taken caught fire on Sandstone Mountain. I think people have seen some of the video and pictures from that. Not checking my brakes at the top. And I think you learn so much from the experience as a driver. You know, a lot of times you go to school and you think you're going to capture everything there is to know about,
Not a
and
chance.
like, yeah, the super trucker, and it's not. You get out and you learned maybe 10%. The rest you're about to figure it all out, and you're about to figure it all out mostly the hard way.
Very hard way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really crazy how much is left off the table when you're going out there to drive an 80,000-pound truck that belongs to someone else. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why I really push the driver training piece. It's like you really got to train your drivers, because I don't care if they have a CDL or not, they're missing a huge amount of what they need to know, especially if they're fresh.
And so what can they do to train them more? Because of course, you can't prep somebody necessarily for like, hey, when you don't check your brakes at the top of the hill, like yeah, you train them to check the brakes, right? But like you can't train them for getting caught on fire. You can't train them for getting stuck on 285 in a 3-day snowstorm. Again, you can say, hey, wintertime, always have your stuff. Like what can they do? Because I was actually talking our last episode, I was talking to this guy, self-dubbed least lucky driver in the world, Philip Gotyev. And he said that just they basically just they don't even train people like Doc anymore. He's like, all
Yeah.
we did for days was just pull out like 90 degrees back in, 90 degrees back in. And he's like, and I see guys can't even, so like what why has it maybe regressed? And what do you think it needs to look like in a nutshell? Of course, we'd be here hours if you described how training should look in
You
its
know,
entirety.
it's kind of I think it goes more to like driver persona and how it regressed. Like I think we got so used to having a persona of driver that was like, for instance, like me, they have a lifetime of experience around this equipment, and we kind of just expected people that went into trucking to kind of already understand trucking.
Okay.
Well, the new age persona of driver does not always that is not always their history. You know, they might have grown up in the Hamptons for all I know, and now they've decided to take up a life of trucking. I mean,
Right.
one of the richest clients I have owns a company that manages the security for the nuclear weapon systems, and his son was one of my driving students.
Probably
And
not somebody who's been around trucking his whole life.
you know what his son went into? Welding. And it's like that's what made me begin to think about this whole thing. And it's like,
Very interesting.
this kid has never worked a day in his life, and he
Must be a
decided to
welder.
go to the Newport News shipyard to learn how to weld.
Which
Uh,
is you can make good money doing, but that's not like an easy 9 to 5.
no, so he really had to like engross himself at the shipyard so the shipyard could really teach him what he needed to know. And I don't think it's any different than truck driving. So you know, for me, I have like a 21 module training program. It covers everything from emergency preparedness and what you're going to deal with. And basically, we can fine tune that for, say, you're a carrier based in Denver, Colorado, and you're just running Colorado to Texas. You're going to experience some winter conditions. You're going to need to know chains. If you're working oil field, there's modules that we have for that. So a lot of times you can consolidate it, but the training and isolate it into what you really need for a driver. But that's not always the case. If you have a van driver that works all 48 states, they're going to experience everything.
A
And you just
lot.
kind of have to
Yeah.
hit on the fundamentals.
Okay, and it's like then it's like, hey, kid, you're gonna learn some stuff the hard way.
Yeah,
Here's some broad things to prepare in this region, this, that region, that. Is my accurate at all?
yeah, and I mean,
Okay.
that's how you can isolate it in a lot of ways, but sometimes you have to look at things like, what are the fundamentals of issues that we face the most common, right? So
Sure.
with me and my mountain issues of avalanche and taking truck emergency ramps and catching fire, coming down a hill, a lot of times it's a brake issue, right? Like, hey, he didn't do a pre-trip and a post-trip, or he didn't complete a DVR, or he didn't check his brakes. And in that case that I caught fire, I didn't. I knew that my engine brake was out. I knew that I had shoddy truck brakes, but I was 100% reliant on the fact that I had a brand new trailer. And I'm like, I'm good. The brand new trailer brakes, I'm good. And it wasn't long before they were smoked. And then after they were smoked, the little bit of trucks I had left, they were smoked. So I think if there was ever a time that I thought that I was going to die, 100%, like I was totally resigned to it, was when I was on fire coming down Sandstone Mountain. I think I got,
Jesus, take the wheel. Like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I called home and I was like, look, I made a mistake. I didn't check this. I'm on fire. I have a load of coal dust. So
you're carrying coal dust too?
Coal dust, 100,000 pounds of coal dust from a place called Coal Fillers in Tams, West Virginia. And it was going to Norfolk and caught fire. We've had one of these burn up before. I knew that once it goes, it's dust, not lump. Done. It's dust.
Yeah.
It's done. So I was like, I got 8 miles to go, and I'm already at 80 miles an hour. And anyway, by the time
flying downhill.
Flying downhill. By the time I got to the mountain, everything was smoked. And we had a computer hook up to the computer, to the engine, to the truck, and it said like the max he ever got to is like 126 coming down Sandstone Mountain. With 100,000 pounds, like there's nothing. You will never be more scared in your life than I was that day. Like I've been through a lot of crap, but that was the day I thought I was going to die, hands down. So
when you say 126, you're not talking top speed.
Oh, 126 was the speed I was going. Yeah. Yeah, that was the top speed I got down Sandstone Mountain.
In a 100,000 pound vehicle. No, 100
gross.
You're pulling, get gross, 100,000. Okay, so the fastest I've ever gone on an empty expressway is about 120, and I have a 2-door, like 8-cylinder Mustang, like, and that's quick. Like I hit that 120, 125. I'm like, okay, I'm good because it's just like, and you were going that fast in 100,000. And there's just like, luckily, just no one around. Like, I can't even fathom this.
No, you have people around. So literally coming down the mountain, you know, you're blowing your horn, you're trying to move around people.
Get out of the way.
No one else is going that fast.
No.
Fortunately, you're not catching up with anybody where you can't move around, where you have like two people side by side. I mean, you're running into a situation where it's impossible at that point. But yeah, finally get to the bottom where it starts to iron out a little. And I can slow my speed. Eventually, at that point, I've cut the truck off. It's still in gear. I'm just waiting for this thing to die. And eventually, at the bottom, I regained, and that was it. Fire department came. They blew it out, and as soon as they would spray it with the fire extinguisher, it'd start right back up. So it was, that was probably the scariest experience, I would say.
That's incredible. Like, wow.
Yeah,
I got nothing. I got nothing on that.
Yeah, it was an event. And there are runaway truck ramps on there, but I'd already taken a runaway ramp before. And what happens when you take runaway ramps is these things have like deep gravel, and they're designed to just make you stop. So what happens when you hit them is, I mean, it pretty much destroys you and the truck. I mean, it is not a smooth ride. So
no,
I was resigned. I am not taking another runaway truck ramp. But the thing with both of these instances is I did not check my brakes in both cases. I was 100% confident that, hey, we were going to be good. Like my brakes should be fine. And I think that a lot of times that overconfidence and that complacency and just that shortcut mentality of check the box, just get it done, make the money. It kills people. And it's exactly what happened in Colorado when the driver didn't check his brakes coming down and he killed like 8 people. He's the guy that got like 100 years. And I think it eventually got overturned. Yeah. It's been the last 5-6 years.
Wow. And got overturned. Why did it get overturned?
Everybody was in an uproar about it. That he got too much time for, essentially his brakes failed. Like it wasn't something, he wasn't high, it wasn't, an intentional act.
It was negligent homicide.
Yeah. He just couldn't stop.
Yeah. I feel like 100 years probably isn't fair. I mean, granted, but like what's a life, right? 8 lives.
Yeah.
That's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, let's lighten it up a bit because that's wild. first, again, I don't think I could say that any more times without people like the 5 people listening hung up. But no, but like, okay, so let's change it to like when you're doing like the undercover driver situation. What was the worst dispatcher you ever dealt with?
I haven't had any bad dispatchers in it yet. Now I've had bad
That's great
dispatchers.
to hear.
Yeah, historically, I mean, we got an email one time, and it's on LinkedIn. I put it out there and said, "This is just not how you should treat drivers." But the
Mhm.
email basically said, "Get the job done. None of this matters. The safety piece doesn't matter. We're paying you to do a job. You need to do it,
Right.
or when you get back here, you're done." So I marked out their name and their information, but you can still kind of see where it comes from. But it's like, this is not how you treat drivers. If you want to keep them, you can't keep these people. These people
Mhm.
can't treat your drivers this way, or your retention is going to be trash. So,
Right.
and your turnover is going to be astronomical. So a lot of times it goes to, there was a poll I think that Sam Watts did recently, like, should your safety team or should your operations team or anybody in your company have driver experience? And it's like, yeah, no, not necessarily. You don't need it. But I think having that perspective and that familiarity and understanding the plight of a driver in any role, I think is going to help you gain familiarity with that driver, build the rapport, and you're going to keep them longer. So, do you, is it helpful? Yeah. Um, because I think you're going to learn how to treat somebody. So,
So, no, I agree with that because the same way, going back to the food service, right? I grew up in restaurants myself. My parents had some stores, pizza places, muffin shops, you name it. But
yeah.
and then I bar back, bartended, fine dining, casual, all of it, right? So to the same point is like if you haven't been in food service, you don't necessarily know how to treat people who work in food service, and which again, they're human beings, treat them right. But you've never been on that side, so you don't know how difficult it really is and what they're actually going through on a shift. Same as a driver, right? If you're a dispatcher who's never driven, you don't know what it's like. If you're in ops or even sales, like where's my truck, or can he, like, he has to get there quicker. It's like no, he can't, especially with these ELDs, right? I mean, everyone's had strong single surge, but everyone's run into that. But if they can't have the driver experience, do you think at these companies that are asset based, do you think that every employee that talks to a driver, interacts with a driver, do you think it's realistic? And if realistic, do you think it would be should be necessary that they do like a week ride along,
I
even if
think
it's like overnights? Well, maybe not overnights because again they have a cab, but a sleeper cab. But I mean, what do you think would be enough to like, hey, understand what they go through?
I think it would be helpful if they did the ride along for any amount of time and just I mean, it needs to be some amount of time, just going to the store with them is
Nothing.
not
Yeah.
fruitful. But, I think, yeah, a lot of times it goes to hiring the right people. It's like, I don't go around, anybody that's met me knows that I don't walk around, like, with a chip on my shoulder and treat people poorly ever. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter who they are. Like,
Right.
there's a guy here named Donnie Marshall, poor homeless guy down the street. I eat breakfast with him twice a week. So it's like, I stay pretty grounded. Like, I understand how to treat everybody. So whether you're at the bottom or you're at the top, I'm going to treat you the same way. And I think one of the things that we kind of just got away from as a people in general is just being kind to everybody. And
Mhm.
you don't have to talk to people that way. So I think a lot of times it goes to, how are you screening these people? Because a lot of times I can sit with someone and within 5 minutes I can tell you that this person is not a good person.
Right.
It,
Just a gut
you know,
feeling.
yeah, you have a feeling, they'll say things about other people. Like, it's just, you can tell it's just not going to go well. So a lot of times I think it goes to hiring the right people to do your hiring. So are you hiring the right HR people? A lot of people think, well, I just hire any old HR person, and that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So transportation specifically has a lot of like intricacies to it. So you need to understand transportation hiring rules, driver hiring rules, FMCSA, uh, basically all the rules that you would need to know that not all non-transportation HR people know. A generalist isn't going to know all this. But at the
No.
same time, a solid HR person is going to treat everyone with respect. generally speaking, that's what I've encountered. So I think just
Mhm.
hiring the right people.
Interesting. Okay. And with how do I want to phrase this? With again hiring the right people and making sure that people just again naturally not necessarily treating people how they should. I mean, we could probably attribute that to a lot of different things. What do you think it has caused that? What do you think has made us get away from it? Of course, I've got my opinion on things. So I guess the way I'm trying to frame this is, with people lately seeming to have less empathy or,
I
or
think
sympathy, where's that stemmed from, do you think?
I think it goes back to what we originally said, like strong men
Yeah.
create rough times. And I think when we're talking about rough times, a lot of times, my younger brother, he was 6 months old when my grandparents got him. So for all intents and purposes, that was really their child. I mean, they had him from basically the time he was born.
Right.
And I mean, my grandmother put that kid socks on until he was 15. He never cut grass. He never was obligated to do any work that everybody else had to
Okay.
do. He was that baby. And
Yeah, yeah, he got it good, if you will.
yeah. And the problem, one of the things that he and my sister both died of overdoses. So
Oh, wow.
one of the things that he fell into was he did not know how to cope with even minor life issues, like, because he
Mhm.
never had it really hard. He never knew our parents before they left. Like, he never experienced tragedy. He never really understood what it meant to cope and what it meant to be at the bottom, right? Like,
Mhm.
he just didn't. And I think a lot of times what happens is even with my children, like I try to, especially my daughter, it's terrible. I don't know what we're going to do with her. It's like I try to
Well,
make like,
she's your daughter, you're supposed
yeah,
to spoil the crap out of her, right? You can't help it.
yeah, and it's like, am I creating a monster? But I think she's very well grounded to where I've taken her and made her volunteer at homeless shelters. I've taken her on relief trips to North Carolina. I've exposed her to like serious traumatic events that have happened to other people. And basically she's aware and of like what goes on in this world, and she's able to cope, and she's really well grounded. But I don't think everyone has that ability, because I think the the more that we the more that we take away the suffering from some of these people, I think that they miss that piece. And I think that that escapes them, that they're somehow better than other people, that they've never experienced what it's like to be at the bottom. So I think to some extent it's that. And to some extent they're just bad people.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some people who are just idiots, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And if this makes you feel any better, Rob, right? So I somewhat joked about, my upbringing, where I'm from, and funny enough, I always get a little bit shy, and I usually just tell people from Massachusetts, right? And then I get the wearing masks, like, right? Because if you know Mass, you're gonna know the vineyard, right? So I get that off rip. People assume like, oh, cushy kid walking around in the deck shoes and the pastels. Um, but if it makes you feel better, again, I personally, and knock on wood, I haven't dealt with firsthand any extreme tragedy, right? I'm very lucky and blessed in that sense. People around me have, people I'm close to have. So secondhand, I've experienced bad things, right? I've seen bad things happen to good people and just tragedy. But I definitely agree that it's exposing your kids to that thing, right? I mean, Martha's Vineyard, I think there was one murder like the whole time I was a full time resident through the age of like 18. And maybe it wasn't even a murder. I think it was just another violent crime. But I remember again, just both my parents born in 60 and 62. Dad went through it, mom Quincy. So my dad did not have good parents. We more or less stayed away from them growing up, and I never understood why. And I learned as I got older. My mom came from tough parents, but had a pretty good upbringing from what I can understand. But they were, they treated us with tons of love. But there was the whole like, I'll give you something to cry about, this and that. And I do remember as well. We did get punished. We were reprimanded. Whacked a couple times, never like beaten or anything, like stuff so that we deserved. And it's like, oh, this is not okay. It's not okay way to speak, act, whatever. And I do I do remember plenty of times where I was shown like, hey, you got to tough this out. One example that I'll share: I grew up playing hockey. I played hockey since I was 7. It's my absolute escape from everything. Unfortunately, my first 3 years of high school growing up on the Vineyard, it wasn't an escape. It was a terror for several reasons. It just wasn't a good place for me, but it ended up making me make a decision that pushed me in a fantastic direction. Anyways, at the summer league, I was skating behind the net, and anybody who knows hockey helmets, they don't do a whole lot for you except keep you alive. They don't protect you too well. They just keep you from dying. So a senior defenseman who 18 years old at the time, he was probably 6'2", about 260, big kid. Let a clap bomb go, and it went off the space right in between the earpiece and the helmet and caught me right in the back of the head. All I know is that I went behind the net, and then suddenly I woke up on the ice. It was like a second later. I was blacked out quick. And I remember, like everybody's around me. I got up, I got off the ice, and I'm sitting in the locker room dark, just totally fell completely wrong. And which translates now to concussion, right? It probably had a concussion. And my parents, whenever they could, my parents were always at everything that any of us did. But I remember the locker room door opening, and it's dark. I had the lights off because I was dying. This was warm ups, right? And I was an entering freshman. And I wanted to make varsity, right? And I hear my dad. He goes, "Dude," right? Again, Boston personify 64-year-old Bostonian, right? That's my father. Except then, shit, 15 years ago now, I'm about 50, 45, 50. He goes, "Dude, what's wrong with you?" I go, "Dad, I just got," and I'm bleeding a little bit, right? I go, "Dad, I took a slash off the head." He goes, "You all right?" I'm like, no, it hurts. He goes, "What are you doing in here?" I'm
You're
like,
alive.
"Dad, I got hit in the back of the head with a puck." He's like, "Well, you better get out there." I'm like, what?" He's like, "Well, if you don't get back out there, A, you're not going to play. B, you're going to be afraid. Like, you got to get out there." So, being the oldest son who does everything his parents tell him to do, I put my gloves on. I went back out there. And I was okay. Like, I played just fine. Like, I didn't forget anything. I remember, getting whacked with the puck. Like, I remember getting my bell rung, right? And I remember all that. But it is true. It's like you said, you have to expose your kids to things, and you have to show them or have to tell them like when to toughen. I remember Little League. I had an ingrown fingernail as a catcher, and my dad took my mom's cuticle cutter and he put a Jenga block between my teeth. And he's like, "Dad, I can't throw. I can't hold the ball." And he's like, "You gonna let your team down? You're gonna go play today?" And he cut the ingrown, like, no, nothing. Like, he put a Jenga block between my teeth, heated the cuticle cutter, and cut my finger open and dug the nail. I'm 12. Dug the nail out, taped it up. I played that night. It's just like so. So to your point, we don't necessarily have to grow up in tragedy to the point of your daughter having a great upbringing. Like, what are we going to do with her? If you're teaching her what life's about and showing her some of the pain, the hard sides of things, I think she'll be all right. That's what I'm getting at. I
But I
turned out
mean,
okay.
like in your case, it's like your experience in life, right? Like there's some suffering there. You're experiencing it, and even when you've gone into restaurants, when you're a bar back, it's like, hey, there's things that you definitely are seeing frontline and experiencing in a restaurant that's going to make you say, hey, I'm tipping 20 to 25% every time I go out. Even if I
100%.
get crappy service, I'm still giving them the tip because that's
Yeah.
what's going to pay their bill, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's what's paying their wages. I mean, in Virginia,
Yeah.
they might make $2.13 an hour without your tips. I mean, most of them have children. Like, how do they live? And I think it goes back to that side of it is like, what kind of person are you? Are you a good person or a bad person? And I think if you're just generally a bad person, that type of empathy and that type of consideration is beyond you. You're so consumed with self. So
Right.
you're not concerned with anybody else or their plight in life. And I think a lot of that goes to the familiarity with suffering, and then that kind of helps build rapport with people. And if you can't build the rapport because people realize that you're fake or a bad person in general, that's a tough road to haul. And then what you end up having is this toxic work environment that no one wants to work in. And you kind of got this 1,000% turnover, and you're just like, I don't understand why. I had great drivers. You did have great drivers, but you have terrible
You
dispatchers.
didn't keep them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's your environment, and as a leader, you have to recognize that those things are happening and kind of put a stop to that. So, I think the root of it is good or bad person, but I think the secondary element of that is are you do you have any familiarity with the struggle that anybody has ever gone through or that these drivers are going through? So
Yeah. And you actually just that brings up another question. You just bring up like, hey, yeah, you had good drivers, but you screwed up.
Yeah.
And feel free to plead the fifth on this if you want, but I feel like you're gonna have a strong opinion one way or the other. Are you of the school of thought that there is no driver shortage, that there's a retention shortage, or do you believe that there's a driver shortage?
So
Sorry, not a retention issue, not a retention shortage, a retention issue.
I think isolated employers have retention issues.
Okay.
I think that, and I know that, for me, there were 3 different companies that from the time I ran it to the time I bought it and owned it and the time that I sold it, drivers followed me from one to the next to the next. My turnover was like 0. But that's because they knew me. You might go out to your truck and you find a Yeti cup with $200 in it one day just because it's Tuesday, or like they knew there was a lunch card in there for them to go to Jersey Mike's or whatever. It's
Love
like,
Jersey
yeah, right. And I'm from Virginia. I'm not even from up there, but
yeah.
I think I've got like 1,000 points there right now. Everybody's always like, why haven't you used your points? Like, I just save them. So
Dude, they got
anyway,
down here in Florida too. I
yeah,
love it.
but it's how you treat them, and I think treating, especially old school drivers, they don't need a lot. Like they just want to know that you respect them, that you listen to what they say, that you care generally and legitimately and genuinely. That's really what they want. Now, it's a lot more complicated with like newer persona drivers because they want so much more. And it's like, I don't think you understand what trucking companies' margins are because we can't give you but so much more. Like we look after you as much as we possibly can. Uh,
Mhm.
but in terms of driver shortage, it was an article I think that came out. I think Tim Dooner posted it earlier, and
I
I
saw it
commented.
today, so I wanted to hear, yeah.
Yeah, I wrote an article about this like 3 years ago on LinkedIn, and I'm like, this is not the case. Like, I think that certain modes can have shortages. Like, no one wants to deliver trash.
Yeah.
Your municipal waste haulers that are hauling tractor trailers of waste that have to get up there and walk on trash and tarp
Smells.
loads every day. No one's doing that. No one wants that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're hiring like the bottom of the barrel because that's the only people that'll do it because they can't find a job anywhere else. So
They're
you're
desperate.
in a
Yeah.
constant state of struggle in those kinds of modes.
Mhm.
But people that are pulling like a $270,000, 275-mile run, they're not leaving that heavy hauler. Like,
Yeah, they're
no.
making a lot of money, yeah.
Yeah. No, because it's like top of the line work. You're not gonna make that money anywhere else. And
Mhm.
they're gonna treat you amazing because they had to train you, not just in how to drive, but like the whole technical aspect of that. And that's
Yeah,
that
it's
you're a high
crazy.
dollar commodity at that point. So
Yeah.
I think the more you treat drivers like a high dollar commodity, the less they're going to leave. But
Mhm.
you we're in what I would call like a multi, some people call it multi-generational. I call it like multi-person persona driver workforce, where you've got so many different kinds of driver personas that require so much or so many different things. Um, like I said, old school drivers, they don't run on much. Like treat them right, let them know you care, give them a little bit of this here and there. They're fine.
Mhm.
Give them the runs that pay the most money. They're going to go kill it and make the money. New
Right.
drivers are like, I don't want to work as much. I want more of a culture focus where I'm getting maybe less money, but more benefits, more health benefits, a gym membership. No old school
Come on
driver wants a gym
weekends.
membership.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You got so many things to consider now. You used to just run a trucking company and be like, hey, the guy just wants more miles and more money and treat him right. Now you're
Send them.
dealing
Yeah.
with like total cultural shift. So,
Mhm.
it's difficult to figure it out, but if you don't figure it out, you're going to struggle.
And I think it sounds like it comes back to just listening to your drivers. What do they
Yep.
want? Like you said, based on the persona. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it makes perfect sense, right?
Yep.
Especially with the culture shift
Yeah.
felt
There's things
worldwide
like
within the US.
if you came to me as a driver and said, hey, I'll give you a gym membership, I'm like, I don't want the gym membership. I want 3 more cents a mile all year
Yeah,
long.
yeah.
And, but you're at that place where you have to like weigh everybody out and figure out like, what is it that you want from me as an
Mhm,
employer? And,
mhm.
it's not as easy to just figure it out and suspect the same way we used to. Um, And the more we get people like, I mean, now we're in 2024. I mean, some of these people could have been born in, 2003
Yeah.
driving trucks in interstate. So it's like totally different mindset.
Yeah, I don't know what a VHS is.
Right.
No, it's crazy. I was a 91 kid myself. My brother's born in 2000. Sister is just 2 years after me. But yeah, it's wild. It's just wild to see, and just the difference in personality and how they think, how they consume things. It's incredible. Um, so switch gears a little bit. Gonna get a little controversial in a fun way. Nothing crazy, promise. And my back hurts from just carrying Paul's section of the show here. The question he always likes to ask, slacker. No, but so we in our conversations, we have, and maybe it's a pride thing, but we've seemed to have uncovered that amongst drivers, there seems to be a bit or full blown hierarchy as far as the modes. We've talked a little bit about modes, specialties, personas, and it seems that the dry van drivers are the ones on the bottom getting ragged on just because it's a simple pickup pull away. You don't get out of the truck. You don't need anything specialized outside of the ability to haul a CDL or to hold a CDL license, excuse me. And in no case, I say this every time, are we taking away from any of drivers whatsoever here, because this is a driver centric podcast. Um, and always advocate for those folks. But do you feel that there is a hierarchy? And if so, for fun, what do you believe that hierarchy looks like in your brain or from what you've seen over your 20 plus years?
I think, I don't know if I'd call it hierarchy or not, but I mean, there's definitely people that get looked down upon as like you are the lowest rung of driver. Like, and generally the way I look at it is who's most likely to hire you right out of school with no experience. And a lot of times, if you go to truck driving schools and they have like the little recruiting expo at the end at the graduation, you'll see the same ones. It's always Prime, US Express, Werner, like the van drivers that they need a lot of drivers. And they'll pay them trash. I mean, when you want to, I mean, the last time I looked at this, I think the entry level out of school driver will pay for your training, reimburse you, was something crazy, like 32 cents a mile, 35 cents a mile. And I mean, I've seen it as low as 28 cents a mile, but I think that's obviously bumped up some since then. I mean, that's been probably 10 years ago, last time I went to a recruiting expo, but it's still bad because I mean, we go from van, and I would say from there it moves up to maybe, let's just say van local driver. But a lot of local drivers, like port drivers, I actually like that.
Yeah, that's a tough job.
Yeah, it's a tough job. Doing dray work is pretty tough work, but you're getting, I mean, those guys are pulling in $2,000 a week if they're with the right people, and that's as a company driver.
Yeah, you're home at night, weekends.
Yep. I mean, generally, you may do a day or two. It's not over the road for sure.
Right.
But then you've kind of got other ones in there, like household goods is kind of a unique animal because you're getting paid to drive, but you're also getting paid to move furniture, especially if you're doing LTL over the road, where you've got like you'll leave in Norfolk and end up in LA, and you'll have 30 stops across the country, dropping off a piano here or a dining room there. It's good money in that. I mean, it's one of the first things. Yeah, and you have to plan your own trip. Like they give you all the bill of ladings for every single item that's on the truck and where it's going to go, and then you look at you figure it out. You get yourself to LA.
So it's not ordered for you in like a software or anything.
Well, they give you like a load list. So this is how it's loaded. So would be the best way because you don't want to have to dig through that crap. You want to offload it before it was loaded.
Yeah.
And that kind of falls into that same category as like food distributors, Cisco, US Foods. I mean, people who are really hustling it every day to really make their money in a manual labor perspective, not just by driving, but a lot of people don't want to do that work. And trash haulers could probably, I mean, I know a lot of trash haulers that are making $1,800 a week right now hauling municipal waste, but nobody wants to do it.
Stinks,
But then you get to like the upper echelons of it. And I think I look at hazmat, heavy haul, jobs that require more mental dexterity, more knowledge, more technical aspect. It's not just turn the wheel, back up, turn right, And I think maybe that's the way to classify it, is how much of it is wheel turning and how much of it requires advanced technical knowledge, right? And
Sure.
heavy haul is probably the most technical job there is because you've got rigging aspects. Um, hazmat isn't much different. Like, I mean, the first time I drove LPG, I filled the tank to like 100% because what do why not?
Yeah, but
Uh,
not a good move.
yeah. Well, if it's 100 degrees outside and you got LPG, which is cold, cryogenic,
Hmm.
you're gonna blow some off. It's waste, and you really can't fill it more than 85% in the summertime on hot days. So there's just a lot of things that you have to think about. Um, Sometimes math. I mean, sometimes physics, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's just initiative, like planning your trip ahead of time, especially for heavy haul. So
Hmm.
I think you kind of work your way from heavy haul down to the bottom. And I think your bottom drivers, your everyday drive, run of the mill, we can hire anybody to do it. Where autonomous is going to start, vans.
Hmm.
So,
Gotcha. And again, still to all the points you made, even though they're bottom or whatever, that's just more the technical expertise that it takes. You're still controlling an 80,000 when fully loaded, a gross 80,000 pound weapon
yeah,
cruising 65 miles down a highway. And I mean, we've interviewed some drivers, they were flatbed guys, but we've interviewed some drivers in their cabs. One of them was driving, which I thought was interesting. Their company signed off on it though, so it was fine. But it wasn't handheld. It was just, it was propped up, and but there's you could see him the whole time. His eyes just flying around the mirrors. No matter what you're driving, you're doing that, and that again, like you should be doing that in your own vehicle. Just imagine that your vehicle's 6 times that long,
yeah.
and and it's so heavy that you could take out 8 people, and they're gone. Like if you crash your own car, even if it's a souped up SUV, like you're not going to take out 8 people unless it's one minivan with a family, right? So it's no matter what. Again, it was the fun of the hierarchy and seeing what you had to say, and again, not taking away from them. It's just maybe the least technical or the starter job, like you said.
You can kind of break it down into like military branches. Like reefer is more like the Air Force,
Oh,
like
now you're gonna get all sorts of
it's
people mad.
cake. It's mostly cake work, right? And
Okay.
it's shiny trucks, and you got time to polish your chrome, and like, oh, it's got to be clean and perfect, And then you've got like the Marine Corps at the top. It's like we're getting down and dirty. Don't care what the truck looks like today. We'll clean it later when the job is done. That's heavy haul, flatbed, and hazmat. Hazmat
Hmm.
sometimes is a little cleaner, but then you
Sure.
work your way down. Like then you've kind of got just your average, Navy seaman or Army specialist, private, and we're down here and back into the vans and municipal trash haulers. So
Hmm.
I guess that's a good way to break it down. It's
I
like
like that. What if you could pick one? What do you like the most?
I don't like the responsibility of reefer. I don't like the responsibility of flatbed, and there's a lot to heavy haul. There mentally a lot,
Hmm.
um, and all of that has a lot of responsibility. All driving has a lot of responsibility, but I think what I
Absolutely.
liked the most was dray work, and I
Great
liked
work.
it
Okay.
because it was quick. I mean, you weren't sitting all day long. You would pick up a trailer, go drop it, come back, get another one, crank it, pick it up, drop it. I mean, you might pick up, I don't know, 10 trailers a day. At the end of the week, you've moved 42 loads in 5 days and
Hmm.
you make 2 grand. But I guarantee you, you did not get fat that week.
Yeah, you're moving. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like
So
it.
the
I like it.
busy,
Yeah.
the busy aspect.
Very, very. Well, I know you've been on a lot of podcasts and had a lot of conversations, and I hope we took this a little bit of a different direction than your typical conversation. But one thing that I learned from when you and I chatted before this is that you do a ton of different things. You do a lot of different things for different people and for different groups. And again, as somebody who has been in logistics just about a decade now, call it about 8 years. 10 years professionally, 8 years in logistics. Um, definitely appreciate all that you do and have done. I think one of your messages to me at one point was like, "Oh, I've got this, and then I got to go to court, and then I'm a professional witness for that." And then I'm like, "You're doing what?" And this is before we talked on the phone. Like, man, what do you do? So, definitely thank you for all that. And I do happy we got a little bit of the personal side of things too, because it definitely helps people understand where you came from and the why. And I definitely agree with, if you come from that hunger, it's like you don't want to feel that again. So you're just fighting. You're always fighting to stay with the lifestyle that you've grown into. So, man, I really appreciate everything that you brought to this today. I appreciate your time. Before I let you kick, any shout outs that you want to give to anyone, also where can folks find you? Let's close with that.
You can find me at carpentercompliance.com or trucksafe.com. So obviously either one of those, like TruckSafe is one of my big things. So we do a lot of data queues. Our goal is really to help a lot of drivers and help companies. So that's a big piece of that. You can find me at Motive. My blog is over at Motive. Substack, I've got a newsletter over there, and I've also got one on LinkedIn. You can definitely find me on LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time.
Mhm.
I think in terms of shout outs, I think probably right now the biggest thing going is Jeremy Reymer's Project 61. So if you haven't joined the Step Up Challenge over there with Jeremy, you can jump in there with me and Mike Lombard and Jeremy and probably 400 or so people that have already signed up. So if you're not there, check it out and get signed up.
Absolutely, man. And yeah, you told me about that. I pulled it up. I got to look at it some more. As you and I talked a little bit about, and shoot, man, I would like to have a round two with you at some point because, we didn't even talk about our exclusive health journeys, more into, what you do today. We kept it more so trucking, which
Yeah.
is great. But no, really appreciate it, man. This has been an absolute blast. And, again, just thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Well, hey, until next time, this is Rob Carpenter. Everybody appreciate it. Thanks for listening.